I turn on the lights, I'd like to remind all the members and everybody in here that Nova Scotia producers and processors will be having an event tomorrow here at the legislature, May the 10th from 10:30 a.m. till noon. It's produce that's in our fields and orchards and greenhouses. So all the members are welcome to attend tomorrow morning at 10:30. It'd be great if we have a nice show for that to support our farmers and producers and their problems. Thank you. Order, please, order. Before I start the daily routine, I would like to, on Wednesday, May the 4th, immediately following question period, the member for Colchester North rose on a point of privilege. Her complaint that was during question period, a preliminary comment that was made by the Minister of Education in answering a question was about the honourable member, and that she found the comment to be personal, uncalled for, and of no bearing on question that was asked. I have reviewed Hansard and found the comment complained of. As members know, the role of the Speaker on a question of privilege is to determine whether there is a prima facie of a breach of privilege. This is clearly set out in Mangut's text, Parliamentary Privilege in Canada. Based on the authorities on what constitutes a breach of privilege, I have concluded that while the honourable member was clearly not happy with the comment that I saw in Hansard, the comment does not establish a prima facie case of a breach of privilege. I thank all members for their attention. Presenting and reading of petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Building Safety Week, May 8th to 14th, encourages all Canadians to be more aware of the importance of how the buildings in which we live, learn, work, worship, and play are safe, sustainable, and sheltering. And whereas confidence in the buildings around us is achieved through compliance with the National Building, Fire, and Energy Codes and the devotion of vigilant guardians, building officials, architects, engineers, builders, tradespeople, and many others. And whereas the National Building, Fire, and Energy Codes provide us with security in everyday times and in times of crisis. Therefore, be it resolved that the province of Nova Scotia recognizes the week of May 8th to 14th, 2011 as Building Safety Week and encourages its citizens and communities to participate in Building Safety Week activities. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of African Nova Scotia Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sherry Borden-Colley is an award-winning journalist with the Chronicle Herald, who also volunteers her time with many organizations and serves as a role model in the African Nova Scotian community, and whereas Mrs. Borden-Colley's story on Viola Desmond, titled Unintentional Activist, helped draw awareness and attention to this important chapter of Nova Scotia history last April. In the weeks prior to this province granting a free pardon to Miss Desmond, and whereas Miss Borden-Colley's story, Unintentional Activist, was recently nominated for a 2010 Canadian Association of Journalists Award, with the award ceremony to take place on May the 14th in Ottawa. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Miss Borden-Colley on her continued fine work and wish her the best of luck at the Canadian Association of Journalists Awards in Ottawa on May the 14th. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Wild Blueberry is celebrating its 15th anniversary as our province's official berry, and whereas wild blueberry crops are worth $40 million in export sales to 30 countries and are the #1 fruit crop in size of export sales in Nova Scotia. Whereas blueberries tout many health benefits in areas such as cardiovascular health, neuroscience, cancer, inflammation, aging, and more recently, diabetes and sight. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly recognize the importance of our provincial berry, the wild blueberry, to our history, economy, and way of life. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver, notice, and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the week of May 8th to the 14th is Foster Family Recruitment Week in Nova Scotia, and foster care recruitment teams are working across the province to raise awareness about the rewards of fostering a child or youth. And whereas in Nova Scotia, foster parents work as part of a team of professionals to give children and youth the love and support they need. And whereas Nova Scotia is committed to attracting and training caring families who can help children and youth, and great strides have been made in recruiting and retaining foster parents in recent years. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House commend Nova Scotia's foster families and encourage more families to open their hearts and their homes to children in need. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas shipbuilding excellence in Nova Scotia predates Confederation, and the Irving Shipbuilding Company has inherited that proud tradition. And whereas the Canadian Defence Review magazine has named Irving Shipbuilding one of Canada's top defence companies and the highest ranked shipyard in the country. And whereas Irving Shipbuilding and the Halifax Shipyard have more than 120 years of highly skilled workforce and modern facilities, making the company ideally suited to build Canada's fleet for the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy. Therefore, be it resolved that the House extends its congratulations to the Irving Shipbuilding Company for this accomplishment, which reaffirms what we already know, that the best ships are built right here in the Maritimes. So, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotians have long been known for their significant contributions and accomplishments within the scientific community, and whereas Willard Boyle, an Amherst native and accomplished scientist who received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2009 for his work in digital imaging, is a prime example of our province's strong academic reputation. And whereas Mr. Boyle passed away this weekend at the age of 86, therefore be it resolved that the members of this legislature extend our condolences to the family, friends, and colleagues of Willard Boyle and recognize his many years of work and subsequent accomplishments that have helped evolve such technology as medical imaging devices, digital cameras, barcode readers, and photocopiers. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 39 of the Acts of 2008, the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter.
Honourable the Premier begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 39 of the Acts of 2008, the Halifax Regional Municipal Charter.
Bill number 62, an act to amend Chapter 39 of the Acts of 2008, the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Promote Education Respecting Concussion in Sports.
Good bill.
The Honourable Member for Hants West begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Promote Education Respecting Concussion in Sports.
Bill number 63, entitled An Act to Promote Education Respecting Concussion in Sports.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I present this on behalf of the member from Cape Breton Nova. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas for many years the Canadian Corps of Commissionaires have been trusted every day with the security of members of this Assembly and the precinct of Province House. And whereas since November of 2007, one of our security officers trusted with our protection has been Master Warrant Officer Robin Vinage. And whereas today, May 9th, 2011, Mr. Vinage was promoted to rank of captain at the ceremony held here in Veterans Room in this House. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly recognize and congratulate Captain Robin Vinage on his promotion on this auspicious day. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Thank you. There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas rural Nova Scotians for many years have depended on the members of volunteer fire brigades to keep their families and properties safe from fire. And whereas the fire department members in recent years have also taken on the role of first responders because the need for medical assistance has increased throughout the province. And whereas many additional responsibilities such as fundraising, training, first aid, recruitment, and public relations are also part of the firefighters' commitment, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Deputy Chief John McKay for receiving the Carl King Officer of the Year Award from the Onslow Belmont Fire Brigade. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I do this resolution on behalf of the member for Cumberland South.
I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution, whereas Mr. Willard Boyle, a Nobel laureate from Amherst, Nova Scotia, whose work paved the way for digital photography, medical imaging, and astronomy, passed away on Saturday at the age of 86. And whereas in 2009, Mr. Boyle was honored with the Nobel Prize for Physics, along with George E. Smith and Charles Kao for their groundbreaking achievements in physics for such discoveries as the transmission of light fibers for optical communication and the invention of the charge-coupled device, which is an imaging semiconductor circuit used as a digital camera's electronic eye. And whereas Mr. Boyle, a veteran of the Second World War, flew Spitfires in the Fleet Air Arm of the Royal Canadian Navy, and after the war he completed his PhD in physics at McGill University in 1950. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly honor the remarkable life of Mr. Willard Boyle and recognize his significant discoveries he contributed to the world of science. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas George Brown lived his entire 103 years of life in Eastern Passage, Nova Scotia, and sadly passed away on February 24th, 2011 at Ocean View Manor. And whereas George spent 40 years as an employee at Imperial Oil, providing for his family as a proud husband, loving father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. And whereas George lived independently for more than 102 years, only entering the long-term care facility Ocean View Manor in 2010. Therefore, be it resolved that this Nova Scotia House of Assembly recognize and honour the long and vibrant life of Eastern Passage resident George Brown, who passed away on February 24th, 2011, after 103 years as a great Nova Scotia citizen. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Berwick and surrounding area was awarded the 2011 Lieutenant Governor Community Spirit Award and was chosen as one of 4 communities that demonstrate engaged and active citizens across many aspects of community life. And whereas the selection team was excited for the communities who were chosen for their pride, enthusiasm, and genuine way in which people have rallied together. Such communities are an inspiration for all Nova Scotians, suggests Lieutenant Governor A.M. Francis. And whereas the Lieutenant Governor will present the awards at a celebration to be held later this summer in the Berwick area. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly congratulate and recognize the community of Berwick and surrounding area as recipients of the 2011 Lieutenant Governor Community Spirit Award. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day to move the adoption of the following resolution, whereas May is Caregiver Awareness Month, a special time to show appreciation for the contribution caregivers make to our families, communities, and healthcare system. And whereas this month's Caregivers Nova Scotia is holding various Caregiver Appreciation Tea events throughout the province as an opportunity to acknowledge the vital role caregivers play in our society. And whereas Caregivers Nova Scotia is dedicated to providing recognition and practical supports to those who give care to immediate and extended family members, friends, neighbours, co-workers, and others in their communities. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly recognize caregivers as important partners in the healthcare system and honour the role that they play in the lives of the people who they care for by acknowledging May as Caregiver Awareness Month. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, with your leave, before I introduce the following notice of motion, I'd like to introduce 2 members of the public who are with us in the gallery. They are Gloria Stevens and Iris Shea. Now, Gloria is president of the Victoria General Hospital Nursing Sisters Nursing Alumni Association, and Iris is the president of their anniversary celebrations committee. But I'm particularly privileged that they've joined us here because Iris is also researcher extraordinaire and has served as a real mentor and role model for me over the years. She's a writer, an artist, an incredibly active member of the community, and a resource for all and sundry. So if you wouldn't mind, I would very much like the House to welcome Gloria and Iris before I read the following resolution.
We welcome all our visitors to the gallery and hope they enjoyed today's proceedings. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Victoria General Hospital School of Nursing began educating nurses in the 1890s, and in March 1920 a handful of early graduates held an alumni meeting, thus inaugurating the oldest continuous nursing alumni association in Canada. And whereas in the early years, nursing alumni made dressings for patients and provided food and gifts to the poor and to patients, while today they work to enhance patient comfort, provide bursaries to further and recognize nurses' education, maintain an archives holding photos and artifacts related to nursing history in the province, and will soon celebrate their 91st anniversary. And whereas today, the VG Hospital School of Nursing alumni number more than 500, who continue the tradition of such distinguished alumni as Laura Hubley, class of 1898, who was instrumental in starting the first nursing curriculum here and implementing provincial examinations in 1925, and honouring the Canadian Nursing Sisters of World War I. Therefore, be it resolved that this House commend the Victoria General Hospital School of Nursing Alumni Association on 91 years of continuous service to Nova Scotia. Thank them for their work to document the inestimable contributions of nurses to our health system, past and present, and wish them all best as they return to the former nurses' residence ballroom at the Bethune Building May 28th to celebrate their anniversary. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Recycles Contest encourages recycling and composting programs and celebrates the ongoing role of Nova Scotia youth in making this province a recognized leader in waste reduction, and whereas the 2010 Nova Scotia Recycles Contest Student Awards Banquet was held on April 27th, 2011 at the Brightwood Golf Club, and whereas Aaliyah Arab Smith, a student at Rockingham School, was the runner-up in the button design contest for students in grades 2 and 3. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Aaliyah on her achievement and wish her well in her future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 432 people who are residents of St. Joseph, Des Moines, Grand Etang, Cheticamp and surrounding areas signed their names in support of a letter requesting the province upgrade old paved roads in their communities. And whereas the goal of this letter was to impress upon this legislature the importance of fixing these roads. And whereas I, as the member of this Legislative Assembly for Inverness, am pleased to table a copy of that letter and those signatures today, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly acknowledge the concerns brought forward by the people of St. Joseph, Des Moines, Grand Etang, Cheticamp and surrounding areas about the need to upgrade their roads. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas from March 11th to 13th, 2011, the Sackville Flyers boys midget AA hockey team and coaches participated in the provincial hockey tournament in Pictou County, Nova Scotia. And whereas they played against the best teams from across the province and had the opportunity to demonstrate the skills that they have been developing all season, and whereas the Sackville Flyers players were awarded tournament MVP, top scorer, top goaltender, and top defenseman honors. The team won the 2010 to 11 Nova Scotia provincial title, and for the first time brought the Midget AA provincial title to Sackville. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulates the Sackville Flyers boys Midget AA hockey team and coaches for winning the 2010 and 11 Nova Scotia provincial Midget AA title and wish them best of luck in next year. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, here notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 225 years ago, a small group of individuals met at the Golden Ball Inn of Halifax to draw up the first articles of the Charitable Irish Society of Halifax. And whereas the original Constitution focused on the importance of encouraging, through a group of individuals with something in common, assistance to people in the community entitled to compassion and relief. And whereas today, 300 members strong, the Charitable Irish Society continues the fine tradition of compassion by donating to charities and organizations active in caring for the sick, the elderly, as well as women's and children's organizations. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the legislature recognize the 225th anniversary of the Charitable Irish Society of Halifax and extend our appreciation to all members, past and present, for their dedication to making our community a better place in which to live. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas community volunteers work tirelessly on behalf of others or a particular cause without the expectation of payment or recognition for their time and services. And whereas Sandra Hogan was recently nominated by the St. Croix Pastoral Charge to receive a volunteer award for her many hours of dedication over the last 5 years. And whereas Sandra was instrumental in organizing the opening of the church as a venue for up-and-coming musicians and for giving artists a place to perform. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Sandra on receiving a Municipality of West Hants 2011 Volunteer Award and thank her for her dedication and commitment. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Pier Gallery, located in Old Town Lunenburg, is an artist cooperative gallery exhibiting the work of 12 Nova Scotia artists who have established reputations with an emphasis on diversity in art viewing, including mediums such as painting, drawing, mixed media, colored fused glass, raku, and mosaic wall pieces, wood turning, printmaking, and other forms of artistic expression. And whereas during the summer months, the Pier Gallery features monthly exhibits and is currently featuring the work of Barbara McLean with her compelling large-scale acrylic paintings. And whereas Barbara McLean's exhibit entitled Old Ground, New Ground opened on May 7th and runs until May 19th with an artist talk on Sunday, May 19th. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognizes the Pier Gallery in Old Town Lunenburg as a venue for showing new and established artists and congratulates Barbara McLean on the opening of her show, Old Ground, New Ground. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Before I introduce before we go to the next notice of motion, I would realize that the Honourable Member for Inverness had an attachment with his resolution, which is out of order. However, if the host gives unanimous consent this one time, I will accept it. I will ask for, is all those in favor say aye? Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
We're in
the Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 6-year-old William Bate of Dartmouth learned to read at the age of 2 and is now studying calculus, particle physics, and chemistry. And whereas William recently won first place in his age group across Canada in an international online spelling bee. And whereas at 6 years old, William currently ranks 46th in the world for spelling. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly join me in congratulating William on this exceptional achievement and wish William every future success as he moves forward in his academic career. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Polytech Windows and Doors of Quebec, Nova Scotia was honoured May 9th at the 27th Export Achievement Awards luncheon as one of the province's top exporters. And whereas Polytech's Quebec factory has been manufacturing its high-quality vinyl windows and doors since 1988. And whereas it is important to celebrate the successes of Nova Scotia's talented export companies and recognize the contributions exporters make to the local economy. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly celebrate the creativity, innovation, and determination of Polytech Windows and Doors and recognize the important impact it has for Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Clara Halfpenny of Pictou County took part in a Young Writers Workshop sponsored by the Pictou-Antigonish Regional Library and their Writers in Residence program, and whereas Ms. Halfpenny was part of a group of 4 young writers from Pictou County who participated in a writing workshop under the guidance of writer in residence Gary Blackwood, and wrote an original one-act play called While It Lasts. And whereas the play While It Lasts was entered and performed at Theatre Antigonish's One-Act Play Festival in March and won the award for Best New Play at the festival, therefore be resolved that all members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate Clara Halfpenny for being part of a group of young writers who wrote an award-winning play at the Theatre Antigonish's festival and wish her success in future writing projects, and furthermore to thank the Pictou-Antigonish Regional Library for its Writer in Residence program. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice, and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Inspiring Lives Awards recognize the achievements of Nova Scotians who have inspired others as they face their own struggles with mental illness and addiction. And whereas co-sponsored by Canadian Mental Health Association Nova Scotia Division and the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia, the nominees have experienced long journeys and overcome obstacles which serve to inspire us all. And whereas in 2011 nominees and their inspirational journeys are representative of the outstanding individuals who make a difference in the lives of many every day, therefore be it resolved that all members of the legislature congratulate the Inspiring Lives 2011 nominees, Shane Brown, Ann Kleik, Stella Ducklow, Danny Himmelman, Graham Hooper, Carolyn Lawrence, Tarina Pickering, and John Roswell for their outstanding contribution and wish them all the best in their future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future date to move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas St. Mary's Elementary School in Aylesford recently placed 4th in the World Literacy WOW Reading Challenge, and whereas this year 61 schools and 11,811 students participated in the challenge with the partnership of local police, libraries, and public schools in Canada, Ireland, England, South Africa, and Ghana. And whereas St. Mary's students have been involved in the contest since 2007 and have always placed in the top 10. And this year's school earned a special mention for extraordinary effort because students read an average of 203 books each between November 10th and April 1st, between November 10th, 2010 and April 1st, 2011. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly applaud the efforts of the participating students at St. Mary's Elementary, as well as compliment Principal Sarah Tessier, former RCMP Liaison Officer Richard Langell, and School Librarian Norma Malott for their support and participation in World Literacy Reading WOW Challenge. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas rural Nova Scotians for many years have depended on the members of volunteer fire brigades to keep their families and properties safe from fire, and whereas fire department members in recent years have also taken on the role of first responders because the need for medical assistance has increased throughout the province, and whereas many responsibilities such as fundraising, first aid training, recruitment, and public relations are also part of a firefighter's commitment. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Chester Sabin for receiving a 40-year-long service award from the Onslow Belmont Fire Brigade. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas people in the Acadian region of Northern Inverness County are concerned about the recent closure of the Bilingual Service Canada Community Office, and whereas 819 signatures were signed on a petition delivered to the federal government to highlight the people's concern, and whereas local offices provide a more people-based approach for the delivery of government services and move jobs from employment-rich urban areas to rural areas of our country. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly acknowledge the concerns of the Acadian region of Northern Inverness County and the steps they are taking to restore the Service Canada Community Office. Mr. Speaker, I will request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on February 10th, 2011, the Bella Rose Arts Centre in Clayton Park was filled with local residents, sponsors and supporters to celebrate the official gala opening. And whereas the opening of this professional 600-seat theatre presents tremendous opportunities to enhance the cultural life of Clayton Park and beyond. And whereas the dream of having a theatre in our community has been realized thanks to the generous corporate sponsors who appreciate the importance of the arts in enhancing the quality of life that we all enjoy. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly thank Killam Properties for fostering and encouraging the expansion of the arts in our community through their financial contribution, which enabled the completion of the Bella Rose Arts Centre. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I'll move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas for many years the Royal Canadian Legion has sponsored an annual essay, poem and poster contest that is open to all Canadian school children. And whereas Victoria Sullivan, a student at Windsor Elementary School, took second place in the poster contest Junior Black and White Division at the Royal Canadian Legion Branch No. 9 in Windsor. And whereas the primary goal of the contest is to foster the tradition of remembrance among Canadians by instilling in youth the importance of recognizing our veterans and the sacrifices that were made and are still being made today. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Victoria on her award-winning poster and wish her all the best in future competitions. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice of passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Where Shalyn Williams graduated from Dalhousie University last June as an electrical engineering degree, sporting an 85+ average. Where Shalyn has roots in East Preston, Halifax, New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. We are proud that she is the first African Nova Scotian female engineer, as well as being a role model to young people. Where Ms. Williams has obtained employment with Lockheed Martin Canada, working on an electrical hardware engineer, on their Navy Patrol frigate contracts, as well as working part-time with the Army Reserve's 723 Communications Squadron. Therefore, be resolved, the members of this House of Assembly join me and her family and community in congratulate Ms. Shellen Williams on her academic and historic achievement and wish her much success in her future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask waiver and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lieutenant Governor's Community Spirit Award recognizes and celebrates Nova Scotia communities that demonstrate unique strengths and a high degree of pride in citizen participation. And whereas the communities included in the St. Anne's Bay North Shore area have been selected for this important award, along with 3 other Nova Scotia communities, because of their high degree of community collaboration and strength. And whereas the community will be welcoming Her Honour Lieutenant Governor Mayanne Francis this summer as they celebrate this occasion, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the communities of St. Anne's and North Shore on receiving this prestigious award and thank them for their continued commitment to all residents of the community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Miners Museum in Glace Bay, which officially opened in 1967, will begin its summer hours on June 1st, offering over 22,000 visitors this year a glimpse into our unique coal mining legacy. And whereas the Miners Museum provides an in-depth look at the mining operations that took place in Cape Breton and includes an introduction into the people, tools, machinery, and processes that provided our nation with coal for decades. And whereas the museum gives visitors an opportunity to enter the deeps for a tour of an actual mine shaft located under the Atlantic Ocean, and guests can also be treated to an exclusive performance by the one and only Men of the Deep's Coal Miners Chorus. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly join me in congratulating Mr. Tom Miller, the museum staff, the retired miners who offer underground tours, the Men of the Deeps, and the town of Glace Bay as they enter their 44th year of showcasing our history to the world. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 2011 marks Yarmouth's 250th anniversary, which is being celebrated by many exciting events that will bring together current and former residents and attract visitors to our beautiful town and area. Whereas for hundreds of years, the historical seaport of Yarmouth has been the friendly and accommodating gateway to Nova Scotia for visitors and immigrants. And whereas Yarmouth is host and home to citizens of proud, rich, and diverse cultural backgrounds, including Acadian, Mi'kmaq, and Métis, therefore be resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Yarmouth on its 250th anniversary and recognize its important contributions to the history, economy, and culture of the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Right on. Here, here.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia and the Canadian Mental Association Nova Scotia's division recently held a ceremony recognizing individuals who have inspired others. And whereas award recipients are selected through a province-wide nomination process based on their achievements and their inspirations towards others while struggling with their own mental illness. And whereas Digby resident John Roswell, founder of the Digby Clare Mental Health Volunteers, has received the Inspiring Lives Award at the ceremony held on May 3rd, 2011. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly express their congratulations to John Roswell and wish him continued success in inspiring the lives of others. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on April 6, 2011, the Bella Rose Arts Centre was the site of an amazing evening of Italian music that was presented as a tribute to the 150th anniversary of Italy's unification. And whereas the evening was made possible by the Italian-Canadian Cultural Association of Nova Scotia and the Italian consulates in Nova Scotia and Montreal. And whereas the audience was delighted by this tremendous opportunity to enjoy famous opera arias and music presented by the award-winning Italian artists of Bel Canto. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Mr. Rodolfo Maloney, Honorary Consul of the Italian Republic in Nova Scotia, and Luigi Velacci, President of the Italian-Canadian Cultural Association, on this wonderful evening of Italian culture celebrating the 150th anniversary of Italy's unification. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia Power has announced plans for rate increases of 4% in each of the next 3 years. And whereas this is in addition to already approved increases for the next 2 years, adjustments to fuel costs, and increases to the efficiency tax added by the NDP. And whereas Nova Scotians are concerned that the NDP response to increasing power rates may be to just take the HST off candles. Therefore, be it resolved that the NDP support calls for a performance and value audit of Nova Scotia Power prior to any general rate hike hearing. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day shall move the following resolution. Whereas May the 9th to the 15th, 2011 is National Nursing Week, and whereas this week focuses on recognizing the dedication and achievement of nurses who contribute to excellence in health care, and whereas this year's theme, Nursing the Health of Our Nation, provides an opportunity to celebrate the unique contributions of all nurses with areas of practice ranging from primary care, acute care, community care, and palliative care to education, administration, research, and policy. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the legislature acknowledge May 9th to the 15th as National Nursing Week and commend nurses throughout Nova Scotia for their dedication to public service and their tireless role on the front line of health care. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Robots East 2011 competition, a robotics competition for the Atlantic provinces, was recently held in Halifax, and whereas the Yarmouth Consolidated Memorial High School robotics team consisting of Christian Muse, Craig Sullivan, Garrett Allen, Laura Eldridge, Josiah Cormier, Sammy Abadib, Daniel Hatfield, Savannah LeBlanc, Runan Wu, Jeffrey LeBlanc, Riley Cook, Mitchell McDougall, Alexandra Cook, and Julian Delesio Doucette competed in this robotics competition. And whereas the Yarmouth Consolidated Memorial High School robotics team won first place in the competition, a first for the school, and won first place in the multimedia and second place in the strategy categories. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Yarmouth Consolidated Memorial High School robotics team, teacher advisor Robin McKenzie, and team mentors Adam Bluey and Leland Whitman on this impressive achievement and wish them continued success. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Recycles Contest encourages recycling and composting programs and celebrates the ongoing role of Nova Scotia youth in making this province a recognized leader in waste reduction, and whereas the Student Awards Banquet for the 2010 Nova Scotia Recycles Contest was held on April 27, 2011 at the Brightwood Golf Club, and whereas Annika Benson, a grade 8 student at Bedford Junior High, was the winner of the magazine ad contest for students in grades 7, 8, and 9, her second such award in the past 2 years. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Annika on her achievement and wish her well in her future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas for 11 years, Reachability has worked towards building a stronger community through innovative programming provided by dedicated staff who support clients living with various types of different abilities. And whereas on Friday, April 29th, the Reachability Community Garden was officially opened on Joseph Howe Drive in Halifax. And whereas the community garden enables individuals to improve physical and mental health by providing a tool to bring people together of different abilities to aid in community cohesion. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the Legislature congratulate founding member Tova Sherman and Asset Coordinator Heather Cunningham on the success of the community garden, and we wish them, and indeed all staff, well in their future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the NDP government claims to have the best interest of low-income Nova Scotians, and whereas the Minister of Justice has seen fit to cut $500,000 from the Nova Scotia legal aid budget, a move which will make it more difficult for low-income Nova Scotians to access legal services. And whereas while the Minister of Finance saw fit to raise 1,400 user fees by 2%, the NDP government failed to increase the income cap to qualify for legal aid services. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly call on the NDP government to invest in the Nova Scotia legal aid program and raise the income cap to allow low-income Nova Scotians access to legal representation. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The honourable member for Richmond.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the NDP government claims to have the best interest of low-income Nova Scotians, whereas the Minister of Justice has seen fit to place a $6,000 cap on parenting assessments, a tool used by judges to help them decide how the needs of a child may best be met in custody disputes. Whereas this cut of $164,000 will be a blow to low-income Nova Scotians and to families that find themselves in difficult situations with the potential result of more costly court time. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly call on the Minister of Justice to review this cut to parenting assessments and provide this House with a justification for yet another blow to low-income Nova Scotia families. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. Orders of the day. Oh, excuse me. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On your behalf, I'd like to bring the attention of the House to the Speaker's Gallery, where a friend of yours and a former hockey teammate, Mark Gardner, is with us today from Horn Road in Cape Breton. So if all members could give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Okay, we'll try this again. Orders of the day, government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
What size is his sweater, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, could you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Would you please call about Bill number 59, the Elections Act?
Bill number 59, the Elections Act. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Bill number 59, the Election Act, be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, I was very pleased to introduce this important piece of legislation this past Friday. Mr. Speaker, I would first like to thank the province's Chief Electoral Officer, Christine McCullough, and her staff. Mr. Speaker, in 2009, the House of Assembly asked the Chief Electoral Officer to review the Act. As part of the review, the Chief Electoral Officer prepared a draft Act and most recently released a report regarding Resolution number 645. With this work complete, Mr. Speaker, government is in a position to introduce new, modern legislation. Mr. Speaker, the new Election Act is a culmination of years of worth of work and considerable consultation. It will replace the current Election Act and consolidate Nova Scotia's law on elections administration and election finance in one comprehensive modern bill. Mr. Speaker, before I go any further, I would like to address the issue of third-party advertising. Mr. Speaker, this is an important issue and one that has sparked a fair amount of discussion. I would like to bring some clarity to this issue before informing the House that during the Law Amendments Committee meeting on this bill, government will be bringing forward a new amendment that will regulate third-party involvement in elections. Mr. Speaker, it will be based on the model in the Canada Election Act, which limits spending for third-party advertising during an election campaign. In Nova Scotia, there has been a total ban on third-party advertising. Under the current law, any expense for advertising that promotes or opposes a party or candidate can only be incurred by a political party or candidate. Mr. Speaker, the Supreme Court has already found that a total ban on advertising is unconstitutional, that it limits freedom of expression. The amendment to the new Act will bring us in line with federal legislation and a decision of the Supreme Court. Mr. Speaker, the Election Act must strike a balance between the right to free expression and the need to ensure no third party is unfairly influenced an election, is unable to unfairly influence an election. While the right of third parties must be considered, they must also be regulated to ensure the election process is fair. Mr. Speaker, this is why we have decided to amend the bill before it passes. Now, Mr. Speaker, I would like to turn my attention to highlighting three key improvements in the Act. Those include role of the Chief Electoral Officer, enhancing voting opportunities, increasing youth participation. I will first speak to changes to the role of the Chief Electoral Officer. This Act brings greater independence and accountability to this role. The Chief Electoral Officer will be an officer of the Legislature with the same powers as the Auditor General. The new Act also strengthens the Chief Electoral Officer's ability to investigate and deal with offences. Mr. Speaker, this Act also includes many changes that should enhance voting opportunities in an effort to improve voter participation. The right to vote to elect government representatives is a fundamental principle of democracy. Traditionally, the right has been taken very seriously and exercised by the majority of people. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, in recent years, we're seeing a steady decline in the number of Nova Scotians exercising their right to vote. The changes we are making should help improve voter turnout. Nova Scotians will have more voting opportunity and improved access. This is especially true for those people who face barriers to getting to a polling station. I'm talking about, Mr. Speaker, about seniors, nursing home residents, and people with physical and other disabilities. Some of the things you might see, Mr. Speaker, are expanded use of mobile polls. The Act will also create a new type of voting opportunity called a continuous poll, which will operate in each returning office until the advanced poll opens the weekend before the election. The final key element I would like to highlight today, Mr. Speaker, is the involvement of youth. This Act will make it possible for youth aged 16 to 18 to get more involved in the administration of elections. young people will be able to play a role as election workers. We hope this first-hand experience with the election process will encourage them to not only vote, but to participate actively in political life. The future success of our province rests, in large part, on the engagement of our youth, our future leaders. Mr. Speaker, there are many, many more changes and improvements outlined in the new Act. From improved accountability for protection of personal information to more modern and simple language. I want to reiterate that the work done by the Chief Electoral Officer has been instrumental in shaping this legislation. In fact, almost all of Ms. McCullough's recommendations are captured and reflected within the new Act. In developing the new Election Act, Mr. Speaker, we consulted with the Chief Electoral Officer on many occasions and have worked hard to get the bill ready for introduction this session. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to hearing from my colleagues opposite as the bill is debated in the House. I also welcome input from Nova Scotians through the law amendment process. Mr. Speaker, this is an important bill and one that I would like to see move forward quickly. The door is certainly open to reasonable amendments from all three parties, and we are willing to work together to come to a reasonable consensus for change. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I want to remind all members of this House that the current Election Act has not been significantly amended in 25 years. As you can appreciate, changes are long overdue. The new Act transports us into the 21st century. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to emphasize the importance of government moving forward with these proposed changes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pleased to rise to speak to Bill 59, the Elections Act, that has been cause for lots of debate outside of this House over the last number of days, and it's nice to finally have it here, and I was pleased to hear that the minister is willing to work with opposition parties on how to strengthen this bill. Mr. Speaker, since the last provincial election, this opposition party has been talking about third-party advertising in this House, and it has been soundly drowned out by the other party not wanting, the governing party not wanting to entertain that. This is certainly an encouraging day that they finally have recognized that it's not just this opposition party, it is not just the Liberal caucus that is standing up and demanding that there be some parameters put around third-party advertising, but it is that Nova Scotians are standing up and demanding that loophole that, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, was used in the previous election by the governing party needs to be closed. And I am pleased to hear him suggest today that he's willing that there will be amendments coming forward. And I look forward to those amendments when they're presented to our caucus and the law amendments to really get to see how far they've gone. Mr. Speaker, just by suggesting you're putting minor limitations on third-party advertising is no way going to correct the problem unless there are meaningful measures and penalties in place to ensure that no third party has an opportunity to unduly influence an election campaign in this province. Mr. Speaker, the Supreme Court has ruled. The Supreme Court has ruled that it is an infringement on rights of organizations and individuals to have a complete ban on third-party advertising, and at no time have we ever suggested that that was the case. But they've also said, Mr. Speaker, that as it is in this province where it is wide open, where any third party can do as they wish, is also inappropriate. And we've laid out in Bill 60 what we think are ways that you can, which is fair, you can measure, is a way to control third-party advertising, Mr. Speaker. It is a way to level the playing field. Quite frankly, it is a way to close a major loophole in how the election financing goes on in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. We, as was mentioned earlier, when this bill was introduced, I found it, we had a chance to look at it and go through it, and I found it rather interesting. There were some interesting pieces to it. The absence of third-party advertising being one of them. The fact that the electoral officer in the province of Nova Scotia, which was mentioned earlier, Christine McCullough, had recommended that that be part of this piece of legislation, but the government chose not to put it in its original draft. Mr. Speaker, for what purpose? It would be interesting when the minister closes debate if he would maybe inform the House and inform Nova Scotians why they would have accepted all of the other recommendations brought forward by the Chief Electoral Officer, but that particular one. And I look forward to that and encourage him to do that. The other piece, which was rather interesting, Mr. Speaker, when they talked about improving training, professional development for election officers, all that we would agree and support, but they also had in their clause of a code of conduct for election officers. Mr. Speaker, it's rather interesting in this House when our caucus stood up and put on a bill that there would be a code of ethics for the members of this House. We were denied the opportunity to amend a government bill to put it forward. But this government recognized they don't want to bring in a code of ethics for the MLAs in the place, but they want to bring in a code of conduct for election officers. Speaker, I would have wished and hoped that not only would that have been part of this piece of legislation, but that they would have adopted the amendment that we wanted to make to the House of Assembly's Committee Act to bring forward the recommendation to bring a code of ethics in for the 52 members that are elected and given the privilege to sit in this House. But instead, they turned against that, Mr. Speaker, wanting to move away from what I'm not sure why they would have ruled on that. We've been trying to understand their position other than to say that the bill went through without it being amended, without it being made strong. If the words of the Minister of Justice are reflective of the government, then you would think that they would listen to opposition parties. When a positive thing comes forward, they would make it part of a piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, so far it has been our experience that has not been the case. While we haven't always agreed with full pieces, we've tried to strengthen bills. We've acknowledged when government has brought in something good, and we've tried to make some changes for the betterment of Nova Scotians. I hope the Minister of Justice is speaking for the entire government when he says we're now looking for some input from all members of this House to try to strengthen legislation. Each of us have our own unique experiences in our individual ridings when it comes to campaigning, challenges that have been brought forward. We're encouraged by the fact that there will be a modernization and the mobile poll will be extended through the advanced poll period. That's a positive. That's a positive improvement. And we encourage the minister to go forward. We also need to recognize, Mr. Speaker, that we need to make an opportunity for every Nova Scotian to vote in every possible way. One of the things that was brought up and been talked about has been the issue of electronic voting. Mr. Speaker, while we have some concerns around it, we are encouraged that we're beginning to look at how we can modernize the way Nova Scotians vote and how we can engage Nova Scotians. Obviously, there's the protection of individual privacy. There's the assurance that we need to make sure that each of us get one vote, and how do we go about doing that, Mr. Speaker? But those are positive steps on how we would engage Nova Scotians. And it's been the fallacy, quite frankly, of members of this House, and I think of some Nova Scotians, that by improving electronic voting, we will engage the young people. Well, Mr. Speaker, in my riding, I can tell you it's not just the young people who are using the internet. It's not just the young people who are taking the opportunity to do a lot of things electronically, whether it's paying bills, whether it is, Mr. Speaker, ordering product that comes into our constituency, into my communities. Mr. Speaker, it is a way to engage all Nova Scotians on an opportunity to participate in the democratic process, participate from quite frankly, their own home, and a chance to make sure that their voice is being heard. We are encouraged by the fact that young people are going to be given an opportunity to work on election days. It's from 16 to 18. It has been the practice, I believe, of all political parties in this province. I know in ours, you can become a member of the Liberal Party at 14, participate in riding associations. You can participate at the provincial level and the Young Liberals, and participate on many of the committees that are involved in our party. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, they've added a valuable voice to the debate in our party. And I know, and I'm sure I speak for all parties, that they do the same. And it is about time that we've had an opportunity to engage them at a young age. Mr. Speaker, as you know, I brought a bill in that I thought we should be discussing whether or not young people should have an opportunity to vote at 16. Participate while they're still home, engaged in the community, and having an opportunity to vote for the first time. This is a great step. This is a positive thing. I believe that we're engaging them to work in the election campaign, giving them an opportunity to see, quite frankly, the process from the inside out, what happens on election day, what happens building up to election day, and on the preparation, quite frankly, for the whole 30 or 35-day campaign that takes place across this province. It would be interesting, Mr. Speaker, if more Nova Scotians had a chance to experience what happens in a campaign, the work that goes on behind the scenes, not just by political parties, but by Nova Scotians and who want the democratic process to work. They understand that in order for that to take place, people have to be committed, to have to be out there voting. It would be interesting that if more Nova Scotians had seen the kind of work that goes into preparing and planning and implementing an election, whether or not the participation rate would go up, Mr. Speaker, I think it would. I think people would recognize it is not just those of us in this House and our individual party affiliations that want to have a vibrant democratic process. There are many Nova Scotians in a nonpartisan way out there helping to ensure that we are engaging as many Nova Scotians as possible to ensure that, Mr. Speaker, that the truest representation of our province arrives in the House of Assembly and try to provide good government to them, Mr. Speaker. We have, it's been talked about in this House, there's been many challenges around voter participation. There's not, as we looked at what happened at the national level, there was lots of talk about there being an upswing in voters, Mr. Speaker. I believe when you compare to previous years where there was a complete drop-off, a small minor improvement is not something we should be boasting about. The fact that 40% of Canadians, 40% of Nova Scotians roughly have not participated in an election campaign is discouraging. And we need to do everything we can to engage them. While I believe there are other things that can be done Mr. Speaker, to improve how people get engaged in the democratic process, why they believe it's important. I think some of the stuff that's taken place more recently have been discouraging for them. And the voluntary planning, the elimination of voluntary planning is one of them, Mr. Speaker. It was a way for Nova Scotians who have an expertise, Nova Scotians who have something to offer, to contribute without actually running an election campaign, without actually having to sit in this House. The voluntary planning was a way for them to enter into some debates when governments were looking for nonpartisan views on how do we best deal with some of the most contentious issues we're faced with. And I think the elimination of the voluntary planning was a step backwards. And it's probably, instead of engaging citizens, it causes them to ask that simple question: why bother? Why participate? When government says, we don't want an organization that might not be promoting something that's not on government's agenda. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not the way, in my view, to move forward, and it's not the way to enhance participation. And we can modernize the Election Act all we like, but if we continue to shut out Nova Scotians in the debate, if we continue to shut out Nova Scotians when we're trying to set out a direction for our province, what we're actually saying, Mr. Speaker, is we're going to shut them out altogether because they'll stop participating in the process, and the 40% will soon turn into 45 and soon turn into 50. Mr. Speaker, it's amazing to me how many people sit in this House with over 50% of their electorate not voting. It's amazing to me how many people sit in this House without 50% of the people who actually vote supporting them. If we truly wanted to modernize that, Mr. Speaker, that means that someone can get in this House with 33, 35% of the electoral support in their individual riding. Mr. Speaker, I believe, and I've promoted the idea that I think we should have a preferential ballot, where citizens in each constituency should have the right to rank the people who are running for office in order. And at the end of the day, you don't get the opportunity to walk through these doors unless 50% of the people said you have that right. I don't think that's too much to ask, that we want to try to get a majority in the individual ridings to send who they want to be their representative. I think those are the kinds of changes, Mr. Speaker, one of many that we could do to improve the process. You and I have had a discussion about how do we best improve what we do here? How do we best make this place more relevant in the lives of Nova Scotians on a daily basis? Mr. Speaker, I've talked to you about the fact that resolutions. I'm not certain that that's the best use of our time. Do I think we should table them? Absolutely. But members here should have an opportunity, starting off in debate, standing up and talking about the important issues in their riding. Can have member statements. letting them stand up and defend the issues that are going on and talk about the issues that pertain to the members that they represent on a daily basis. Mr. Speaker, question period is another opportunity. If we want to engage Nova Scotians, we should be improving and modernizing this facility, making sure that an hour and a half debate, an hour and a half question period on Wednesday, Mr. Speaker, quite frankly, should be changed. We should be moving to 50 an hour minute 4 days a week, in my view. We should be looking at, should we have 2 supplementary questions, Mr. Speaker? Maybe we should have 1 and have an opportunity to get more questions out, have an opportunity that the place becomes relevant. You know, we're talking about now having, part of this is giving the electoral officer an opportunity to have e-voting. Mr. Speaker, today we still cannot table an electronic petition in this House. The member from Halifax Clayton Park has raised this issue for as long as she's been here. And we're still waiting. I think in the spirit as we're moving to modernize the Elections Act, Mr. Speaker, I know that the member from Richmond had an opportunity to take a committee around this province to talk about how do we improve electoral participation, how do we improve the House proceedings. Mr. Speaker, that committee made a recommendation, made a report, which is sitting somewhere on a shelf. I think it is an opportunity to take the Justice Minister at his word, to put together a all-party committee to make true recommendations that this House will accept and adopt to move forward to improve how democracy works in this province. Mr. Speaker, we joked that we celebrated 250 years of parliamentary democracy last year, Mr. Speaker. We're the oldest parliamentary democracy in North America. And I can tell you by the way we do business, most people would probably say that, without even looking it up, say that's accurate. Mr. Speaker, this is an opportunity. As we move forward and we look at the Elections Act, it's a real chance to show that bipartisan approach that the Minister of Justice was talking about. Let's show that to Nova Scotians. All of us in this House, I'm sure, want to see the work that we do here to be modernized and improved, and our caucus will be more than willing to help participate that, providing it is in a meaningful way, and the recommendations would come to the Speaker, and that we as a committee and we as a House would adopt those recommendations to help make this place more relevant to Nova Scotians. If we truly want to increase the participation of Nova Scotians, we have to somehow ensure them and convince them that the work we do is important to them, and that the work we do in this House is relevant today and will affect their lives today and into the future, and that we want them to participate in it, not exclude them from it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to go back, if I could, just for a second on third-party advertising. I think it's an extremely important piece that we, as a House, recognize the loophole that is provided there. There's been an awful lot of talk, particularly around union contributions, as many of you know, and being able to send out ads. As I'm sure you know, Mr. Speaker, there was an ad sent around during the last campaign that was funded through third party. It was a union pamphlet that was sent around. It was sent in a lot of households. I'm sure you are well aware of the issue that happened during the election campaign when there was a contribution made to the New Democratic Party. It was which was a $50,000 contribution, Mr. Speaker, which was $45,000 over and above what was the limit which you were allowed to contribute. Which at the time the Premier had said had been returned. We come to find out later it hadn't been until later on. Mr. Speaker, those are all serious offences. Those are all serious concerns that clearly lays out a loophole. But Mr. Speaker, it's not just, quite frankly, the unions. It's not just the unions that, quite frankly, could use that loophole of third-party advertising. There are many different organizations. You know, and I couldn't help but look, as we were leading into the federal campaign and the barrage of negative ads that were going on in this country, made me think, quite frankly, of the United States and an American-style campaign where we have constant advertising by outside organizations personally attacking members of the Congress or Senate or a would-be president. And it led me to believe, quite frankly, and I think it led many other Nova Scotians to believe, and Canadians, our campaigns are starting to reflect that. when we do the kind of advertising leading into a campaign. Mr. Speaker, in this province, we've tried to somehow control corporations, union donations, the amount of money that can go into our individual campaigns. But we haven't in any way, shape or form dealt with the kind of third-party advertising, the kind of money that can be for outside groups to influence voting in this province, Mr. Speaker. It is a clear, and there's nothing else than to call it a major loophole in the system. And Mr. Speaker, anyone, third party, who wanted an opportunity, quite frankly, to defeat you, could have unlimited access to that. Spend money as they saw fit, without having to account for it, without having to be registered, without any of the requirements that we would just automatically assume would be in place to protect the process. Mr. Speaker, no one, and I think we'll go back to Supreme Court. Supreme Court said you cannot freeze out complete third-party advertising. You can't shut out the people's voice. Organizations have a right to be heard, freedom of speech. But that also, if you go back, and I know there's a number of legal scholars on the other side who will be able to look at this, they also said you do not have the unlimited right to influence campaigns, nor should it be carte blanche wide open. It was challenged in British Columbia, it was struck down, Mr. Speaker, but it was replaced and improved. It was brought in where the spending limits were modest, and Supreme Court, it was challenged again, and Mr. Speaker, lo and behold, it stood up. Federal government has limits on third-party advertising when they made changes to the Election Act nationally. Those have stood up. Do I think we should have some serious questions about the amount of money that should be spent leading into campaigns, and particularly around negative advertising? Absolutely. But I think in this province, before we go down that road, we should look at how do we deal with the major problem in here, which would be third-party advertising and an opportunity for any organization to be able to unduly influence the process. I think what we're looking for and what we want is an opportunity for every member of this House, every political party, to express their views, to be able to have their ideas to put out in the public debate without being unduly influenced by a third party that may, quite frankly, be very narrow-focused, well-financed, but quite frankly not worried about what is the best for our province, but really how does this affect their organization or their membership, Mr. Speaker. And with, as the Minister of Justice talked about making changes to this I'm going to call it a loophole around third-party advertising, I am hoping that the attempt he's going to make is one that is sincere, one that is not as wide open that you can say there are some controls, but very loose controls. Mr. Speaker, that's not going to close it. We had, this bill was introduced in the House on Friday, and we're now having government talking about amending it. It really begs the question of why they didn't accept this recommendation early on from Christine McCall, the Election Commission Officer here in the province of Nova Scotia. You wonder why they wouldn't have done that. And is today's response from the minister is the response today from the minister one that is just trying to quiet down the outrage that is coming from Nova Scotians about the loophole? Or is it going to be a sincere attempt to close that gap and ensure that we have a level playing field across this province? Mr. Speaker, everyone has a right to participate. Everyone has a right to go out campaign. Everyone has a right to make sure that their voice is being heard in an election. But we need to make sure, quite frankly, that while we're trying to limit the level of participation some people can have in an election campaign, we do not leave the door open for others to have unlimited access to being able to influence the final debate. And I go back to this, and I've talked about this with the federal, when it was around the federal campaign. We're heading down a road of U.S.-style elections. You just have to watch what's going on. Third-party advertising is wide open, and it is year after year, and it's a constant election cycle down there. And Mr. Speaker, we don't address this in a meaningful way I see this coming down where we could end up not only having third-party advertising affecting the election campaigns, but it'll actually be ongoing. And from, in non-election years, putting dollars into the fact that we're going to influence how Nova Scotians are going to vote, how they're going to participate. And that is not the direction I believe we should be going. It is not the direction and how we're going to engage Nova Scotians. If you look at U.S., for example, Mr. Speaker, their voter participation is about 50%. It's worse than ours. And that's the issue around the third-party advertising, this negative kind of campaign that has been taking place, which is it is actually to discourage people from participating so the number gets lower and we need fewer and fewer people to get elected. And that is not the kind of direction where we want to go. Mr. Speaker, we need to be finding a way that would encourage Nova Scotians to participate in this process. We've laid out some of the ways where we think we can do that. I'm hoping as a will of good gesture that was spoken about earlier, and I know the member from Richmond debated this the other day in this House around voluntary planning. It is our hope that that would be removed out of the bill that is being talked about, being separate, having a way to engage Nova Scotians. Because, Mr. Speaker, while it may not be a tool that government wants to use all the time, and it's been reported, the Deputy Premier suggested this, it's a tool they've not used at this point since becoming government. It is a tool that I think should be there for a government who wants to reach out beyond its ranks and get not a political view of a particular issue, but a view that is one built around hiring the right expertise, about going out, allowing Nova Scotians to come to meetings, allowing Nova Scotians to help set a real agenda, not in a controlled way by a political party or on a political agenda. That would be a good first step in opening up and making sure that there was a way of engaging more citizens. The decision to remove it, I think there's been an editorial in the local paper. I think there's been in every media that you've talked about. It's talked about this as being a step backwards. And Mr. Speaker, we agree. This is a real chance. This is a real chance for the members of this House to tell Nova Scotians that we've listened to them, that we've heard what they've said, and that we want, and that we're going to respond. And obviously, the members of this side of the House need your help because government has the majority. At the end of the day, they'll get bills passed as they see fit. But I would encourage them to look at voluntary planning as a way, quite frankly, to send a message to Nova Scotians that the Elections Act changes were important, but we're not stopping there. We're going to engage, we're going to find an avenue to engage you as citizens to keep participating, to keep having your voice heard, a way to say to them, while we're trying to modernize how we do elections, we're also going to make sure that the process between elections is one that engages you, not one that has shut you out. And the voluntary planning one, Mr. Speaker, which has been here for decades and has been used by previous governments on quite frankly, really divisive issues, is a way to encourage Nova Scotians to say, you know what, we've heard you, we've listened to you. Not only are we going to leave that in place, but we are going to look at how we participate in democracies. We're going to put tough measures on third-party advertising. We're going to find new ways for people to participate. We're going to extend special polls in through advanced poll days. We're going to find new avenues for citizens to be able to cast their ballot, because it is important that as many Nova Scotians as possible get a chance and exercise that right to vote, and we're going to do that. And Mr. Speaker, in the process, we can say to them, and we're going to modernize the Nova Scotia legislature on how we do business. We've recognized that there are some new ways of doing things. There's nothing wrong, Mr. Speaker. Every household in this province, every business in this province takes a moment in time and backs up and pauses and say, are we doing things properly? Are we going forward in the right direction? Have we met our personal goals as a family? Have we met our personal goals as a business? Is this the direction where we thought we were going? How can we improve it? How can we make it better? How can we not only make our company grow, but that's what we should be saying here. How is it that we can improve the process to ensure that we're making Nova Scotians feel like they're part of this, and they are part of it. You know, each of us go back into our ridings on a weekly basis and out campaigning, responding to the needs of our constituents, and we can do that in an effective way when they arrive with something that pertains specifically to them, and we can help find their way through the bureaucracy to find an answer, to find some positive result, or quite frankly, just find a result. But Mr. Speaker, it's much more challenging when you're talking about a global issue on how do each of us have an input into some of the global issues, and particularly in a majority government. Madam Speaker, we have, it is always important that we have a way that we change on the fly, that we can adapt to new things. It's encouraging, Madam Speaker, but we need to find a way to do that with the Elections Act. And one of the ways, Madam Speaker, I think as we go forward and we talk about youth participation, we talk about young people not participating, I think we would do well as part of this. I think we do well as an organization. I think we would do well as we try to modernize this place to reach out to young Nova Scotians and say to them, what is it that we can do? What is it that we can change? How can we improve the system so that you feel you have a voice in it, that you feel that is important to you, that you feel that the work we're doing matters to you? We should reach out to them and find a way to engage them. I applauded earlier that allowing 16 to 18-year-olds to work for Elections Nova Scotia is a good first step. But we need to go much further. We need to go much further. I think we need to find a way to reach out and ask them, why is it that when they reach 18, it's not as important for them to participate? Why are they, you know, I can remember my first opportunity to vote, how excited I was. This last federal election, my son's first opportunity to vote was this last election campaign. And you know, he was excited about the opportunity to participate. But what was actually quite nice for our family was that my son went to vote with his grandfather to recognize the importance of participating. They didn't discuss how they were each going to vote, but they went and voted. And that was the most important aspect of the whole process. Now, members of this House and our young members of our family, our children, of course, exercise their right because we encourage them to do that. They understand what we do. They see firsthand the importance of participating, the importance of being engaged in this process. But that's not the case for a lot of young people in this province, and we need to reach out to them and say, how can we best as elected members of this House, as the Chief Electoral Officer, how can we best reach out to you to have your input on how we improve the rules and regulations and how people participate, and encourage them and ask them why they're not, and how can we make it more relevant to them in terms of voting. It's not as simple, Madam Speaker, of extending special polls. Well, that makes it easier for all of us who are going to vote. That makes it easier for those who want to vote to participate. It doesn't do anything for that 40% who are not voting. We need to find out from them why not. And Madam Speaker, and I'll go back and tell you that I think part of the reason is how we conduct business in this facility, and I think we need to improve that. I think the decisions we make around, and a prime example is voluntary planning. I know I've mentioned that 3 times, but I'm going to tell you, Madam Speaker, I heard about that a number of times. I heard about it, as a matter of fact, I was laying a wreath at the 66th anniversary of E-Day at Soldiers Memorial Hospital, and the topic came up around voluntary planning. I was surprised to hear it at that event, but it came up because it is a concern. Nova Scotians saw that as an avenue to participate in a nonpartisan way, and particularly those who have an expertise in a particular issue or topic that was being discussed by that voluntary planning, and it was their way of participating and improving the democratic process, and they're discouraged by the way in which we're eliminating it. would have much rather had that piece being debated individually and not lumped in a larger bill which talks about how we change democracy in the province, or how we're changing how government is going to be implemented. Madam Speaker, you know, there was changes in it from the elimination of health promotion, a few other changes that took place, a new department that was created. Those things are all make sense to be part of that. But voluntary planning, in my view, is so important that we should have excluded that and had that as a standalone issue that we could have debated on its own merits in this House. Madam Speaker, well, when I go back to the Elections Act and the kind of changes that we are seeing, you know, we too want to thank the people who participated in that. Christine McConnell, obviously, who's leading the way, and while we welcome her new role in terms of being independent, that she'll come back directly to us in this House. Mr. Speaker, that doesn't mean much if no one's going to listen. That doesn't mean much if she's going to report to this House and we still ignore it. And that's what took place. One of her recommendations was we need to deal with third-party advertising, and we ignored it. So what difference does it make if we give her all the independence and we never report back to the House if we're not going to take her position seriously? If we're not going to recognize the thoughtfulness to which she went about doing her business, and with the support of the people she's reached out to, with the thoughtfulness of the people who had participated in the changes that were going to take place, if we're not going to accept those, we can give them all the independence we like. They can report to whoever they want. But if we're not going to be binding, or we're not going to accept what she says, then what's the difference? We're still left in the same position where we were when we started. You know, it gives her some independence on who works in terms of returning on in some of the elections across the area, but that's not what I don't believe that's what she was looking for. I believe what she was looking for was an opportunity to report directly to this House, which we've given her, but more importantly, I think she was hoping that there would be a sincere attempt by all of us to accept the recommendations that would come forward, and particularly when it's not just from her. Those recommendations were put in. All three parties have people who sit on the Elections Commission for Nova Scotia who were participating. They reached out beyond just the people there who were participating. They reached out to Nova Scotians, and they brought forward recommendations. And what's really interesting about the third-party one, and she highlighted in her report, she highlighted the fact that that was the one that kind of kept raising its ugly head in the last campaign. It was the one that she had to deal with more often than not, and as I'm sure, Madam Speaker, you're well aware of, it lingered beyond the campaign because it continued to be talked about. And what she is saying, this is a problem. It's not like we're trying to anticipate a problem. We know it is a problem because we've already experienced it. So let's put some rules and regulations around third-party advertising in a meaningful way, as every other province in this country that has gone on to modernize their Elections Act have modernized third-party advertising. They've dealt with it. Even the national government has dealt with it. But for some reason in this province, even though we've had more problems with it than anybody, we don't need to deal with it. Well, that's not the way to go, and it is not showing the respect, in my view, that we should be showing to the Elections Nova Scotia. It's not showing the respect we should be showing to the volunteers from our individual parties who've gone out and worked to try to improve the Elections Act. It's not showing the respect to the voters of this province to ignore what has been the biggest single problem facing our election, the last one, and that was third-party advertising. That was being able to move around the election spending limits by outside organizations. And it's been well known that it's happened here. There was other issues around the campaign about people not recognizing how much they can actually literally contribute to a campaign. But as serious as that was, and it was serious, the biggest way to circumvent the election rules in this province is through third-party advertising, and it was used effectively in the last provincial campaign. The fact that we need to find a way to be able to eliminate that is a positive thing. You know, and Minister of Justice, who stood here today and said he's going to put some recommendations forward. I hope to see those before law amendments. It would be, since he's obviously given some long-term thought to that, I'd like to see, you know, he as a caucus would like an opportunity to see those before we reach law amendments. Chance that we can, you know, I think we can work collaboratively on this issue. After hearing the minister stand up today, the only issue is what are the limits will be. And I think if you look at what's happened nationally, if you look what's happened in British Columbia, which is, you know, British Columbia is a great test model because it's been challenged in the Supreme Court. Canada, it's one that stood up. They brought out, which are prorated from the national level. There's some, it's pretty easy. And it's easy for us as all members of this House to be able to come together on what is, I think, a very reasonable landing spot on this particular issue to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to participate, to ensure that everyone has had a chance to have their say, but making sure that no one and no organization has an undue ability to have undue influence on the outcome of an election campaign, whether it be at the provincial level or whether it be at the local level. Madam Chair, these are all reasonable requests. It's reasonable when the elections officer in the elections Nova Scotia made it, and it is one that we fully support. As you know, since the last campaign, I've introduced campaign financing reform, third-party advertising bill every session. We've adjourned the House, we've prorogued the House every session, and I've reintroduced that bill. Ironically, that we're debating today Bill 59, and the bill that I've introduced is Bill 60, which actually talks about how we don't eliminate third-party advertising, we control it. We do it in a way, and if you look, we lay out inside of the bill, it would be prorated based on obviously the electoral district size of our population, but also comparing it to nationally and as well as comparing it to what's happening in British Columbia in terms of the number of electoral seats and how much we can spend in each we put a cap on the overall spending, but it also allows them to spend a certain amount in individual ridings, which is not, and which is quite frankly gone to the Supreme Court and withstood the test, and it's constitutional. You know, since we all agree that this is a real challenge and it's a loophole, that we finally all come to the same soft spot that Elections Nova Scotia were leading us to, then the only thing left to debate are the numbers and how much. And it would only seem reasonable that we would look at jurisdictions which have already done it, had it tested in court, had it been in a positive way, it has been held up, said it's constitutional, you're not infringing on anyone's right or any organization's right to free speech. What you are, though, is making sure that no one has undue influence. That's already been tested. We have an opportunity just to reach out, look at the numbers, prorate them so they make sure that they fit with our province, that they're reflective of the number of electoral districts here, reflective of the population, and implement them. And I look forward to having that conversation, and I hope, as I said a few minutes ago, I hope that our caucus gets an opportunity to see the amendments before we ever get to law amendments, before we get through the public debate. I hope we get an opportunity as a caucus to see those. We would be more than willing to work with government to ensure that those limits are positive. Those limits are positive, and encouraging. Madam Chair, if she wants to, she can do it. Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the honourable member for Truro Bible Hill on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Yes, I'd like to introduce a couple of people in the balcony today who are visiting from Truro. We have Ernie Lund, whose late wife, Lenore Lund, recently passed, and Ernie and I became friends when he came into my office to thank me for the card that I had sent him. And we also have his daughter, Catherine Saxton, and she is the mother of our wonderful page, Kate Saxton, here. So I just want to welcome them and thank them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'd like to, before I recognize the member, recognize the honourable member for Argyle, also on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I also like to do a quick introduction in our West Gallery. We have a visitor, a friend of mine, a brother to EA. I used to have him. Many of you would have remembered Kevin Surratt that worked with me for a number of years. Well, Paul Surratt is joining us today. Kevin's much wiser, a little bit older brother, and I just welcomed him to the House and enjoy the proceedings here in the Legislature.
Thank you very much. I welcome all visitors. I now recognize the honourable leader of the official opposition party.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Welcome. It's great to have visitors here, and especially great to have a family of a Page, someone who's participating in the democratic process here, to not only view what we do, but more importantly, to recognize and support their daughter, who I'm sure this will not be her last opportunity to be involved in the process in a way that's beyond just being a Page. I'm sure she'll welcome the opportunity to maybe seek public office someday, Madam Speaker. But to go back to Bill 59, it's been brought up as I've mentioned a few times, and I know that the minister has gone out and spoken now on around what the third-party limits will look like. Surprisingly enough, he said he never thought about that until the media spoke to him last Friday. Interesting, because which is quite alarming at this point, because the Elections Nova Scotia actually made the recommendation around third-party advertising. So if the minister hadn't thought about it until the media brought it up, I'm wondering if you read the rest of it. That's a little bit discouraging at this point. And the other issue was when he talked about, when the media asked him, well, what were the limits? And he said, well, we want to maybe mirror the federal guidelines. Well, Madam Chair, it's my hope if we're going to mirror the federal guidelines that we better prorate them to be reflective of this province. As you know, there's 308 plus seats in the federal Parliament of Canada. There's a large amount that is a total maximum spending of $150,000 for a third party. Well, in this province, that limit is way too high. That limit is way too high. Needs to be reflective of the fact that we have 52 electoral districts in this province. It needs to be reflective of how we want to do business. So I am concerned. While I was encouraged by what the minister said at the beginning of his remarks around third-party advertising, I am concerned about his remarks that outside of this House, remarks around, well, I didn't think about it, it didn't come to my attention till the media asked me. Well, as long as he's been in this House, we've tabled the third-party advertising. He's been in this House, I've asked the Premier questions about third-party advertising. And Elections Nova Scotia actually made it a recommendation to deal with third-party advertising, and we didn't. So I hope between now and when this bill leaves this House over to the Red Room for law amendments, that we have put together some real restrictions around third-party advertising, and we have a full understanding of the amendments and the direction where government may want to go on that particular issue. It is extremely important that if we're going to cooperate in a bipartisan way, in a meaningful way, to deal with an issue which, as of tonight, all three parties have recognized as a problem, then I hope we do that prior to going into law amendments, that the amendments to this bill will come to our caucus so we can talk about them. I would encourage the minister to look at the bill that I've introduced, Bill number 60, which lays out in it. It talks about the federal restriction on third-party advertising. It talks about the numbers that have been used in British Columbia, which have stood up in the courts, and it actually gives out numbers for our province on a meaningful way to control third-party advertising in a way that would be reflective of the number of electoral districts, reflective of our population, and it also be a way that ensure that no entity, no third party has a chance to influence an election in this province. It will be, they can participate, of course they can, and we encourage that, just like we encourage all Nova Scotians to participate. But they should not have the ability as an outside organization to be able to influence. And I'll go back, Madam Speaker, we've talked an awful lot about unions, but they're not the only organizations that can have, they're not the only third parties that'll be out there. There will be others. And we need to find a way to ensure that we do not end up like in American-style election campaigns, where people who have invested interest in a particular issue are coming out and spending a lot of money to get people elected, not because they believe they're the best person to represent their state or their community. They want to get them elected because they support one thing, and that's their issue. We need to make sure that we eliminate that possibility from growing in our province. And I can tell you, I can just see the day where there are people outside who are the political people who think they'll be looking for ways around this rule. If the third parties have a limited opportunity to spend, how can we find a way to do that? Well, we want to eliminate that before we get started. And I think we can do that. I think we can do that in a constructive way, in a nonpartisan way that allows that voice to be heard, allows every organization to have its say, but allows no one to be able to control and manipulate the process beyond where it should be, Madam Speaker. I know each of us have an opportunity, each of us have a chance as we campaign in our ridings, as we go around and we're trying to encourage people to participate. We're trying to encourage participation not only by individuals, but we all go to organizations. We all go to them and try to, because they have large numbers, and we go to them, whether it be an opportunity to speak to the Rotary Club. We get an opportunity to speak to different organizations because it's a large number that we can use to best get our message out, all of which are positive, all of which should be encouraged, all of which are good things. But I think we all recognize, and we can break it right down to our individual ridings. And I think we break it right down. No one organization should be able to determine whether I get elected or not. That's not healthy for the people of Annapolis, nor is it healthy for any other riding. Well, that's why we need to control that third-party spending and advertising. And when you bring that out on the national level, or on the provincial level, it's the same thing. We provide an avenue for them to participate, to spend their money, to encourage them to go out and find their candidate of choice, whoever he or she may be, and support them, but not in a way that gives them too much influence. Madam Speaker, that was the case in this province at one point. Business had too much influence at one point. They were spending a lot of money, unlimited opportunities, unlimited. And we moved to prevent that. But they were doing it in an open way. They were doing it directly. We now have a loophole that you can do it indirectly, with no rules. That's a step backwards in many ways, and it's not where I think we were going with the election reform, nor was it where we were going in terms of campaign financing reform. It is important that as the minister moves forward on bringing these amendments in, that he welcomes a conversation with the two opposition parties, that he welcomes an opportunity to be able to set out what are meaningful restrictions and numbers. It's not elimination, as I said earlier. It's been challenged already in the Supreme Court of Canada. In British Columbia, it's withstood. The only thing they've said is you cannot limit third-party advertising altogether. Putting restrictions on it, and if what they did in British Columbia is they prorated what happened nationally to their province. They went and said, okay, what happens when we move from 385 electoral districts to 85? They capped the limit, and they made it possible, Madam Speaker, that law withstood a test, and it is now that third-party advertising is controlled in the province of British Columbia as well it is nationally. It is doable. It is one that we can do collectively here. It is an opportunity for us as a host to show Nova Scotians that we are working collaboratively in a way that will improve the changes in terms of the Elections Act. And it is one that I think then we take the next step. And the next step would be, as I had mentioned earlier, modernizing the House of Assembly, modernizing the way we do business. And I threw out some ideas. They may not be accepted by everyone in this House. That's fine. I'd love to hear others. I'd love to hear the ideas of members of this House and members of citizens who tell us how we can best modernize the work we do, so they feel it's meaningful to them, that they feel it has an impact in their lives. Madam Chair, one of the things I know, maybe restrictions around when we sit in the spring and fall, when we start, when we finish, put a fixed calendar out. Those are all would be ways to engage not just young people, but engage Nova Scotians. We as a party, as I'm sure all parties in this House, are finding a way, how do we best engage young people? But what's really concerning, Madam Speaker, it's not just young people who aren't voting. That 40% who don't vote aren't all made up of 19 and 25-year-olds. There's a lot of citizens in our province who said, what's the use? Why do I participate? And I'll be honest with you, I've been extremely discouraged, not by the federal result. While I might not have liked it, I can tell you I was really discouraged by the young woman who got elected in Quebec who never campaigned. Because people in my riding, whether I disagree with them, and I do in some cases, they work to get elected. I lost the campaign in '99 and I knocked